The Battle of the Somme was one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the First World War, lasting from July 1 to November 18, 1916. It took place along the River Somme in France, and was primarily fought between the forces of the British and French armies against the German Empire. The battle is remembered for its immense scale, the heavy casualties, and its significance in the course of the war. Background of the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme was conceived as part of a larger strategy by the Allies to break the deadlock of trench warfare. By 1916, the Western Front had become a stagnant line of fortified trenches stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The French, in particular, were struggling under the weight of the ongoing German offensive at Verdun. General Sir Douglas Haig, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, sought to relieve pressure on the French by launching an offensive on the Somme. Preparations for the offensive. In the months leading up to the offensive, British and French forces prepared meticulously. More than 2 million shells were stockpiled for a massive week-long artillery barrage intended to destroy German defenses. This preliminary bombardment, which began on June 24, 1916, involved nearly 1,500 guns. The plan was to weaken the German lines so severely that the advancing infantry could easily capture the enemy positions. In addition to artillery, the British introduced new technologies, including the tank. Although they were still in their infancy, tanks were expected to play a decisive role in breaking through the German defenses. Nevertheless, many of the British soldiers were new recruits, part of the so-called PALS battalions, groups of friends and neighbors who had enlisted together. This inexperience would prove to be a significant factor in the coming battle. The first day of the battle. On July 1, 1916, at 7:30 a.m., the British infantry began their assault. The attack was supposed to follow the week-long bombardment, but the artillery had not been as effective as hoped. German defenses, especially their deep dugouts and barbed wire, remained largely intact. When British soldiers went over the top, they were met with devastating machine gun fire from the German lines. The first day of the Battle of the Somme is remembered as the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. By the end of that day, the British had suffered approximately 60,000 casualties, including nearly 20,000 killed. Despite this catastrophic loss, the attack continued in the following days, with the hope of achieving a breakthrough. The role of the French army. While the British bore the brunt of the initial attack, the French army played a crucial role on the southern sector of the front. French forces, more experienced and better equipped, made significant gains, capturing several German positions. However, like the British, the French faced stiff resistance and were unable to achieve a decisive breakthrough. General Joseph Joffre, the French commander-in-chief, had hoped the Somme offensive would relieve pressure on Verdun. While it did succeed in drawing German forces away from Verdun, the progress on the Somme was slow and costly. Use of tanks in battle. September 15, 1916, marked the first use of tanks in warfare. The British deployed 49 tanks in an attempt to break through the German lines near the village of Flers. While the tanks initially caused panic among the German soldiers, mechanical problems and poor terrain meant that many tanks broke down or became stuck in the mud. Only a few managed to make a significant impact on the battle. Despite these limitations, the use of tanks demonstrated their potential as a future weapon of war. General Haig believed that tanks would play a crucial role in future battles, though their full potential would not be realized until later in the war. The stalemate and attrition. Throughout the summer and autumn of 1916, the Battle of the Somme became a war of attrition. Both sides dug in, and the fighting devolved into a brutal struggle for small gains of territory. The landscape of the Somme was transformed into a hellish wasteland of mud, craters, and barbed wire. Soldiers on both sides endured horrendous conditions, with little shelter from the elements or the constant shell fire. Despite the immense casualties, the Allies continued their offensive. By November, the British and French had advanced approximately 6 miles into German-held territory, but they had not achieved the decisive breakthrough they had hoped for. The end of the battle. On November 18, 1916, the Battle of the Somme finally came to an end. The onset of winter, combined with the exhaustion of both armies, forced the fighting to cease. The final tally of casualties was staggering. The British suffered approximately 420,000 casualties, the French around 200,000, and the Germans approximately 465,000. Though the Allies had gained some territory, the battle had not succeeded in breaking the German lines or achieving a decisive victory. It had, however, served to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun and had forced the Germans to divert troops and resources. Legacy of the battle. The Battle of the Somme is often viewed as a symbol of the futility of trench warfare during the First World War. The sheer scale of the casualties, combined with the limited territorial gains, left a deep impression on the soldiers who fought and on the societies they returned to. The Somme also marked the beginning of a shift in British military strategy, with greater emphasis on new technologies and methods of warfare, such as the use of tanks and coordinated artillery barrages. In the years following the war, the Somme became a focal point for remembrance. Many of the battlefields were preserved as war cemeteries, and memorials were erected to honor the dead. The Thiepval Memorial, for instance, stands as a tribute to the 72,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who died during the battle and have no known grave. The Somme in popular culture. The Battle of the Somme has been remembered in numerous works of literature, film, and art. Perhaps most famously, the 1916 documentary film The Battle of the Somme, which was filmed during the battle itself, brought the realities of trench warfare to the home front. The film, seen by millions of people, was one of the first to depict the horrors of modern warfare and played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of the war. Writers such as Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, both veterans of the battle, later wrote poignant poems that captured the sense of disillusionment and horror experienced by soldiers on the Western Front. Owen's famous poem Anthem for Doomed Youth and Sassoon's The General remain powerful testaments to the emotional toll of the war. The Battle of the Somme, though not a decisive victory for the Allies, was a turning point in the First World War. It exposed the limitations of traditional military tactics and underscored the need for new approaches to warfare in the industrial age. The Somme also highlighted the immense human cost of the conflict, with more than 1 million men killed or wounded in just a few months of fighting. Today, the battlefields of the Somme are a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the scale of the war and to pay their respects to the fallen. The lessons of the Somme continue to resonate in discussions of military strategy, leadership, and the human experience of war.